Welcome to Thriving Together Conversations. My name is Blessing and I'm the founder of Thriving Together.
My name is Lolade and I'm one of the hosts of this show.
Thriving Together exists to inspire and empower women and teenagers to embrace their unique God-given potential and to live a purpose-driven life through authentic conversations, real life stories of transformation, and the sharing of practical wisdom. We are rooted in Christian principles and we aim to foster personal and spiritual growth by promoting self-worth and a sense of belonging. We believe that together we can overcome obstacles, we can break barriers, and lead lives that reflect God's purpose for each one of us.
We were joined by Nike Kazzim virtually this week on the topic Navigating Success in Career and Personal Growth. Nike operates as the head of HR for the UK and HRBP for the corporate and investment banking business at Standard Chartered. She is a mentor and a coach and a co-founder of Standard Chartered's Futuremakers Rise Employability Program, which was a recipient of the Lord Mayor's Dragon Award in 2023. She has a strong background in driving HR transformation initiatives. Nike is so authentic and courageous, and she brought her passion into the conversation this week. Let's listen. I'm so thrilled to have you here with us, Nike. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
You look gorgeous, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Let me briefly touch on Nike's background. Nike is the head of HR. She's a coach, a mentor, a huge advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, social mobility in particular, and has been a key member on several diversity and inclusion councils. She has a strong background in driving HR transformation initiatives and a track record of delivering on the full HR lifecycle. Today, Nike operates as the head of HR for the UK and HRBP for the corporate and investment banking business at Standard Chartered. Wow, Nike, your bio is fantastic.
Thank you. So kind.
So with your wealth of experience and your leadership skills, I in particularly am looking forward to hearing you share your valuable insights into navigating success within career growth and personal growth. But before we start, let's just break the ice.
Okay, go for it.
So, Nike, can you just tell us a little bit about what initially interested you? What led you into going into HR? What led you to going into HR, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just before I start, I'd like to say thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be among you all. So I graduated in 2008 with an undergraduate in psychology. And that was around the time of the financial crisis as well. So I found myself at a crossroads juncture because I hadn't applied for any graduate schemes the prior year that would have, arrived at the point that I graduated for me to step into. I didn't have, any corporate experience of any sort. And I felt like I'd left things pretty late. So I always knew that I had an interest in people, behaviors, and I studied a few modules that gave me exposure to that. And I also had a strong interest in business as well, because I did a business studies A-level. So I thought, okay, what opportunity do I have to kind of marry the two and practice the two to some extent? And then did a bit of research and I figured, okay, human resources would be a great vocation to explore. But then I found myself unable to secure anything, right? Because I didn't have a HR master's, I didn't have any HR experience. Again, I just left it late to secure any form of graduate job. So I decided to enter the field of HR for a very unconventional route. And I actually started out as a personal assistant. So I realized I couldn't actually get a standalone HR role because no one wanted me, the lack of experience that I had. So I said, okay, cool, I'll get creative. So I applied for a personal assistant role supporting three heads of HR at a time at Lloyd's Bank. And then through that, I got exposure to the world of HR. Like I would read my boss's papers, I would sit in on meetings, I would ask the business partners if there was anything that I could help them with, just so that I could figure out for myself if HR truly was the vocation that was right for me. And then when I came to a place where I realized, okay, look, I wanted to give this a shot, I spoke to my boss and I said, look, I just don't know how I'm going to get a HR job. So I've realized that I can do the CIPD postgraduate diploma. So that's the HR postgraduate qualification that's recognized globally. And I was like, look, I can do this and that'll probably put me in really good stead when I'm applying for roles. Would you be willing to sponsor it? And at the time, it was pretty expensive. It was like £9,000. And I was just a PA, right? She could have looked me straight in the eye and said, absolutely not. You're hired to print my papers and get my food from prep. But she was a massive advocate for advancement and developing talent. And she was like, look, I'll pay for it. But, you know, you need to focus on your day job. Like your primary purpose is to work as my personal assistant and support me and two other HR directors. And if you can carve out the time to do the qualification, then I'll pay for it. And then from there, I was able to apply for an internal job that was of a generalist nature. Did that for about a year and a bit, I think it was, and then was made redundant from Lloyd's, and then moved on to Barclays, and then it just took off from there really in terms of like being able to establish myself on that HR track. And yeah, here I am today at Standard Chartered. And it's my second stint there as well. So it's been quite an interesting one. So we can maybe delve into that later. But yeah, 15 years later, still very much engaged and tapped into the HR agenda. So yeah, that's pretty much me.
That is such a beautiful story. So let's talk about career growth. What are some of the key factors that contribute to a meaningful career growth for an employee?
I'm not saying that you shouldn't take on board somebody else's advice, not at all. And we should all have a certain level of awareness and be open to learning, but you need to enjoy what you do, and you need to feel that what you ultimately embark on aligns to your purpose. And, you know, the types of activities that motivate you and inspire you and enable you to pay it forward and just become the best version of yourself. So I would say, you know, own your narrative concerning your career. Another thing I would say is invite people to join you on the journey. And where I'm going with this is that I feel that for anyone who has aspirations of driving their career forward, I think it's really important that you curate for yourself a board of advisors. And that's ultimately like you treat yourself like an LLC, right? So you treat yourself like a business.
Yeah.
And get very clear on who it is that you want to consult with before you make a key decision, or whose input you value before you decide on which direction to move. And I think once you can clearly establish who should sit on that board of advisors, you want to then like have some sort of conversation with them to let them know that, look, you know, you will be tapping into them in that capacity. Yeah. But then that also helps you to understand whose viewpoints to filter out and who's to actually run with as well. Because the reality is that there's always going to be like a long queue of people wanting to give you feedback. And like one of my favorite books, I'm not going to express the curse word, but it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a You Know What. It's an orange book. Yeah. And the premise of the book is like, look, in this world, you've got to be very clear on like who you are and where you're headed. And you can't be a people pleaser in all things to everyone. So you need to be very clear on whose feedback to take heed to and whose feedback to kind of say, thanks, and just park it. So I think having a board of advisors, I think, is also key to having a meaningful career, because it means that you've got people who can journey with you and help you appreciate your blind spots as well. I would also say have fun with it, and take risks. Like one of the biggest risks I took was moving to the States. And at the time, it didn't make sense to a load of people. They were like, hold on, you know, you just moved into like your new place, just renovated it, and like in less than a year, gonna like up and move six and go to a different country. You don't have anyone in New York like to support you. Like, are you sure it's the right thing? But that was the biggest, I mean, that gamble paid off. It was like probably one of the biggest risks that I took, and it paid huge dividends. So I would say take risks as well. Take calculated risks, like be responsible, but take risks, because no risk, no gain, no reward, right? But again, like those on your board of advisors can help you to, kind of gauge what risk appetite you might want to, you might want to go with. I don't know if like all on the call are people of faith, but I'm Christian and I pray. I don't make a move without first praying, and that gives me peace with what it is that I'm trying to achieve in terms of making the next step in my career and it being a meaningful one and an impactful one as well. And the final thing no, two other things actually. One thing I would say is like, be open. I feel that sometimes we can do ourselves a disservice by having this very rigid mindset and wanting things to unfold in this very linear fashion. And the reality is that like your career doesn't always take a straightforward path. Sometimes it's, it's almost a spiral, right? And you've got to be open to the twists and the turns, and there'll be a fork in the road here and a curveball thrown here, but just be malleable, like pivot and just take it all in your stride. Like I have this saying, rather than you win or you lose, I think you win or you learn. I think that sometimes we're so hard on ourselves that we expect the next move to be the one that solves everything for us. And I'm like, actually, if you learn from it, you still won, you still gained, like there's nothing to regret. So be very open to the direction in which your career may evolve. And then the final thing I would say is feedback. Feedback is a gift. Now, the reason I talk about feedback is when I spoke about how I embarked on my journey in my career in HR and that I was a personal assistant, I was not a great personal assistant. And that was the first experience I had of ever having an appraisal. So my boss pulls me in the room and she's like, basically like, you're not performing. And I'm like, okay, so this is my first ever time receiving feedback in a constructive setting. I'm like fresh out of university. And then I'm like, oh, and I took it really personally. Then I start crying in the room. The poor woman, like we're still in touch to this day, like so we joke about it, right? But then I start crying in the room and I'm literally sobbing because I take it personal. But at that point, I don't know that feedback is a gift. That my willingness to take on board feedback and just sit with it and cogitate on what somebody has shared is what is going to set me apart from others as I continue to evolve as a person. So treat feedback as a gift. It's not always pleasant. But to my point as well about the board of advisors, if you know who's on your boards of advisors, you can then prioritize whose feedback to run with and what to do with it. So
absolutely,
that's the final nugget that I would give on that one.
Amazing. You've actually touched on one of the questions I was actually looking forward to asking you, feedback, but we're still going to go there anyway.
Okay.
Still talking about career growth.
Yeah.
Tell me, how does an employee identify, growth opportunities within their current role?
So I'm actually going to flip that one because sometimes the growth opportunities that will elevate you to the next stage in your career don't always come within your current role. And sometimes actually you've got to create the opportunities. They're not always there.
Yeah.
You've just got to be willing. I think if you have the will and you have the appetite, you'll be surprised as to what will pleasantly fall onto your lap. So I give an example. So at Standard Chartered, I co-lead on the skills-based org agenda for the banks. What we're ultimately trying to do is build an organization that is skills-centered. So we're trying to democratize learning and transform the way that we assess talent and we build capabilities within our workforce. And one of the things that we do as part of that is we advertise gigs. They're almost like short-term assignments that are available for colleagues to, throw the hat in the ring for, but they will do them side of desk. They will do it alongside their day job. Yeah. So that's why I flipped it on its head, because sometimes actually there might be an opportunity that you do as an add-on. It's not actually within your role. So you have to almost then say to yourself, right, if I know that I want to do X, Y, and Z and it's not in my role, how do I get it? And that's where, going back to the board of advisors, that comes in, because ideally your mentor should be on your board of advisors. Now, some of you may know what a mentor is, and sometimes we talk about mentorship and sponsorship, so I'll take a step back. So your mentor is ultimately somebody who's a trusted advisor that you would go to seek counsel from, use as a sounding board, and ideally you've identified this mentor based on the extent to which you believe they can pour into your career based on where you are today, right? Usually they'll be more senior than you. They've got more experience. worldly experience, and can impart that wisdom into you as you invite them to journey with you. So in an ideal scenario, if you want to take on X, maybe your role doesn't offer it, you might then want to have a conversation with your mentor and kind of say, hey, like, can you maybe help me think outside of the box? Then maybe they throw an idea out there. So if you're an employee at Standard Chartered, for example, and you came to me and said, look, I maybe want to build leadership skills, but you don't have a leadership role, I'll say, you know what, why don't you take on this gig, this assignment, where you can actually then oversee a project, and through overseeing the project, you actually get to lead other people because you're directing the flow of work and you're trying to empower them to journey with you to deliver on this piece of work. So to the exam question that you asked me, like, how do you identify opportunities within your role? I would flip it on its head and say, actually, it's more to do with identifying opportunities based on what you have access to, and it may not necessarily be within your role. So that's the first thing. But if you're asking specifically in the context of your role and it's not so obvious, I would then encourage you to ensure that you're having development conversations with your manager and helping them to understand what it is that you envisage as next. Because sometimes we place unrealistic expectations on our managers and we think they just know everything that's on our mind and that our career trajectory is like a burning priority for them, and it's not, because you're one of a number of direct reports, right? And it's not so obvious. So it is your job actually to ensure that people are very clear on what it is that you want and the trajectory that you've set yourself. And then you can then invite your manager, your mentor, some of your colleagues, etc., to be part of that. And they may then be able to help you understand where the opportunities are based on things that haven't seemed like gleamingly obvious to you. So yeah, that's what I would say. Another thing I would mention as well is that sometimes you might express interest in an opportunity and it may not come within days, it may not come within months, it may take a year for the opportunity to come. But that saying by, I think it's Lao Tzu, I think it is, like, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Sometimes just having the conversation and planting the seed is enough for somebody to understand, okay, this person wants to go here. They then keep you in mind. And then it may be, that's how my relocation came up to the States when I was working at Barclays. So I said, hey, I want to work in the States. Didn't happen for a year, but I had the conversation a year in advance. And then when the opportunity came up, it was like, Nick, the role's there. Can you please apply for it? And then I secured it. So yeah, I would say in summary, have conversations with your manager to invite them to be part of the journey with you. Seek out a mentor because they are a great addition to have on your board of advisors. Understand that opportunities may come outside of your role, and also recognize that opportunities, even when you've expressed interest, may take a bit of time for them to materialize. Just be open to the timeline as well.
I want you to talk a little bit more about constructive feedback. Some of us are not able to take constructive feedback on board properly. So what do you think, is it wise to seek constructive feedback?
Yeah, I mean, feedback is a gift. That's always been my view, and I maintain that view. It doesn't always mean, though, that the feedback providers are capable of providing constructive feedback, one. And it doesn't mean that every bit of feedback that you run with, every bit of feedback that you get, you run with, right? So you've got to be discerning. But a few things I would say is this. It's important to get feedback because you can't journey alone. You really can't. If you want to become, a great leader, a leader of tomorrow, if you want to continue to evolve and have that growth mindset, you need to take on board the feedback of others because it can really help you understand your blind spots, and also be a source of encouragement as well, right? So that you know the things you are doing really well too. It's not all negative. And like a shorthand way of soliciting feedback that I like to use when I go out to my clients, I'll just say to them, look, give me a few things I should stop, start, continue, because it's not all bad. You want to hear the great stuff as well, right? We all want the affirmations and the praise as well. So it needs to be balanced. With the constructive feedback, sometimes you have to spell it out to people, the quality of feedback that you want, because some people just can't give constructive feedback. Never assume the feedback provider can give constructive feedback. That'll be the first bit of advice I would give. So be in control of the type of feedback that you want. So when you reach out to your feedback providers, you can use the stop, start, continue methodology, or maybe you could say, look, based on my involvement on this particular piece of work, would you be able to share a few bits of feedback? Because sometimes people forget what is really obvious to you. So you may have worked with somebody on something 9 months ago, but they're probably receiving like loads of feedback requests from so many other colleagues as part of the year-end process. So you have to prompt them. So you can prompt them, you can give them some sort of framework to use for providing that constructive feedback. Now, when the feedback comes in and it doesn't seem like it is constructive enough, feel free to ask people to then give illustrative examples, because it might sound a bit rebellious. I don't take everyone's feedback because it's not always constructive. And I'm just like, yeah, I know what to do with it kind of thing. But sometimes the feedback is a bit washy, or it's a bit woolly, right? It's a bit wishy-washy, it's a bit woolly. So ask the person if they can maybe elaborate and give you some examples. And that's not you being defensive. That's you wanting to understand based on a live example how you could go back in time and do things differently if you had the opportunity to do that. And then I think another thing is like, it's important that you are clear on whose feedback really does matter and whose doesn't. And I keep going back to this point, but okay, I had my year-end appraisal in November and I'm sat down. So I have two managers. I'm based in London. One of my managers is based in New York. The other one's based in Singapore. So I'm sat down and they're like virtually, and they're both on the screen. And one then gives me feedback from one of my clients. And she's like, oh, this person said that. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing anything with that. Not to sound arrogant, because I knew exactly where that person was going. I was like, it doesn't add any value. Like, this person doesn't get what I'm supposed to do. My job, I'm the head of HR. I'm not here to do like low-level admin, but that's what they see HR as. I was like, okay, cool, that's fine. That's their feedback. It doesn't mean it's valid. And then another thing as well, when you get the feedback as well, try to resist the urge to respond to everything in that moment, especially if it's a conversation. Because I think a sign of maturity is your ability to say, okay, let me go away and reflect on that and I'll come back to you. Rather than it being like a line for line, tit for tat. Somebody says, oh, you could do this better. And you're like, well, I don't agree. It's like, it doesn't need to be like that. Take it away, reflect, try and take the emotion out of it, try and be logic-based, logic-led. And then come back when your thoughts are gathered with a very constructive counter or response, right? If you feel that maybe the feedback isn't very constructive, or it is, or it's lacking.
Well done. Thank you very much for that. So a lot of people feel stuck in their career. You know, I don't know, it might be called career stagnation, you know. How do we how do we break free from, being stagnant, just in one spot, not moving, not growing?
That's an interesting one. And I'm going to start off with a very, I'm looking down as I say this because it might be a bit inflammatory, but I'm going to start off with a very provocative statement, which is, I think the first step is to recognize that in this world, nobody owes you anything. Nobody owes you anything. And I say that because the moment you realize that nobody owes you anything and that nobody's responsible for your career but you, first and foremost, it's very empowering, because you almost have this aha moment and you're like, oh, now it makes sense. Because this whole time I've been going into these one-on-ones kind of saying, I want, I expect, and nothing's happening. And you're trusting that because you've spoken up about it, it must be going to somebody who's going to do something about it. And then when you have that moment of realization where you're like, actually, if it's meant to be, it's truly up to me, you then you reframe your mindset. You then start to take things up a gear and you become more intentional about curating the career that you want for yourself. It's not saying that you do it alone, but it means that you're more intentional, you're more proactive, that you truly are the one in the driving seat, and that you're not handing somebody else the keys to the car for your life. You're like, no, I'm driving. You're the passenger in my car. But I feel that too often we place that power in the hands of those who never should have been given that power to begin with. And we overestimate people's ability to advance our career to the next step. So classic example, sometimes your manager is not going to be the one to take you to where you need to be. Sometimes your manager is not even your sponsor. Let that sink in. Your manager is not even always your sponsor. They will nod their head. They don't want to do anything with you. But wait for it. Sometimes your manager is not even your biggest advocate, not because they dislike you, because they themselves, they don't even know how to do the things that you want them to do for you for themselves. They don't know how to advocate for more for themselves. So how can they advocate for more for you? You know?
Yeah.
And it's a conundrum, right? And I had that aha moment about 5 years ago in my career. And I was like, this is why these things have not been working, because you assumed your manager could do these 5 things. You assumed that one of those 5 things was that your manager was your sponsor. And the moment I kind of sat with that, and it was quite deep and quite profound, I was like, right, okay, that's fine. I now need to construct a new reality and be focused on what I can be in control of in pursuit of getting to where I need to get to so that I don't feel stagnant. And I made that point earlier about the moment you realize that no one owes you anything, lead into a moment of empowerment, is because you then move away from being a victim and feeling like things are happening to you and that everything's out of your control to believe actually I can take it forward. So I would say that for me is the first thing that needs to occur. I think there needs to be that moment of realization, that shift. But even when you have come to that realization, right, you still find that there's a bit of stagnation in your career. Then you need to ask yourself, okay, cool. How much longer do I want to be here? And then devise a plan. So I experienced a period of stagnation in one organization. I won't name them. And I was like, okay, this is just not happening. So I set a timeline, but guess what? I didn't tell anybody what that timeline was. No one knew. So I set a 6-month timeline for leaving that company, kept it to myself. Nobody knew. I had the conversations. I continued to show up like I wanted to stay. And I was like, okay, I would like more, are there opportunities in any of our global locations? Like I kept having the conversations, but nothing happened. But only I knew the timeline. Found another role, resigned. I set myself 6 months. I said, if it's not fixed in that time, I'm off. Now, again, I could only do that because I was empowered to believe that actually nobody owed me anything, that I had seen enough in terms of what people could and couldn't pour into me, and therefore I had to be able to take this forward. And by doing that, I showed the people around me who should have shown up for me and who weren't able to for whatever reason, what it is that I know I deserve and the standard that I expect for anybody who is my manager, who is a mentor, who is supposed to be on my board of advisors, right, in an organization. And then I left, but I left in peace as well. It wasn't an argument. There was no confrontation. I'm leaving because I'm angry. No. It was thank you so much for the opportunity. Appreciate the experience. I found something that can offer me what I would like based on the next step in my career. And I left. And that's it. So sometimes you just got to set yourself a timeline, but don't be noisy about it. It's deeply personal. It's for you. Nobody else needs to necessarily know about it. Continue to demonstrate maturity and explore all the possible options and be open. But I kind of feel like, again, another deep statement here, but people do to you what you tolerate.
Yes.
So if you have said, I'm stagnant and you are not doing anything about it, and 3 years later you're still there, well, why are they not going to continue overlooking you when you have not shown them what you believe in terms of your own value and what you're deserving of?
Yep. Brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you. Let's talk about personal growth. Nike, I want to know your own, how do you define personal growth and how is it different from career growth?
The reason I'm pausing is because I would like to think that there's a utopia that exists where the growth is universal. You don't have to almost like dichotomize the personal growth from your career growth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I feel that it makes it a lot easier just to evolve as a person when you can experience that growth across multiple fronts. But to answer your question, like when I think about personal growth, I think about growth that is not in the context necessarily of my career, right? But I would like to think that some aspects of my personal growth do lend themselves useful to my career growth.
Yeah.
And also in the inverse. So to give you an example, career-wise, I'm working with an executive coach, but there are a number of things I'm learning from those sessions that I can then take and incorporate into my personal life as well. But I think that for me, if I think about personal growth, it truly is personal.
Yes.
It's really personal, right? And for me, the personal growth is more to do with the journey. It's more to do with all of you. It's where you've come from, where you're headed, who you are. It's more holistic, I think. It's more, And I actually think that personal growth can encompass the career growth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they kind of work hand in hand.
They do. I think there's a lot of synergy between the two. So that's why I
Yeah.
kind of paused initially asked the question, because I'd like to think there was a world, there's a utopia where actually there is that fusion, that natural fusion between the two, and
Yeah.
they're not so dichotomized. Because I feel that the moment you can understand the synergy between the personal growth and the career growth, the more powerful position that you're in. I think dichotomizing them, it can make it more complicated, but there is merit to at times dichotomizing them and separating them, you know? So yeah.
I think as you grow personally, you kind of bring those values and principles into your career, isn't it? Um,
Absolutely. And I think like on that values piece as well, because I was having a conversation with a friend who was talking about the interview process, and I was saying to her, you do realize that when you go to a job for an interview, even though they call you for the interview, you're interviewing them as well. And I feel that there comes a point as you get older where the values piece, the alignment between the company's values and your values matters more than ever. There's
yes.
certain things that you can't, there's certain misalignments that you can't downplay or overlook because of how personal it is and because of the growth journey that you've been on as an individual. The two almost need to be intertwined, right? And if there isn't enough overlap or alignment, it just doesn't work. And you just know there's going to be a conflict if you were to join that company because of the personal growth journey that you've been on and the misalignment between your values and their values.
Yeah. So how would you advise an employee who's trying to, achieve a work-life balance, but at the same time also wants to grow career-wise, personal-wise? What advice would you give to such an employee?
I just feel like I'm just like throwing out all these like controversial statements, but I'm going to start with this one. Choose your hard and be at peace with it. In this life, we are all choosing our hard. Staying in shape is hard. Being out of shape is hard. Choose your hard and just be at peace with it. And the reason I say that is because I have come to realize as I've progressed up the ranks that, I don't know if it's work-life balance that you achieve. It might be harmony. Because for me, and that's my interpretation, right? Because for me, balance almost implies that it's 50-50. It's like a scale, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
sometimes it's not 50-50. Sometimes it's 40-60, but you've chosen your hard and you're okay with that. You
yeah,
are at peace with that, right? To somebody else, that work-life harmony might be 80-20. Like I've worked with some stakeholders and work is their everything. Like they thrive off being contacted when they're on leave. Like they can't wait to get back to work after 2 weeks off and be like, oh, I've missed it. That keeps them going. And I love that for them. So those people, it might be 80-20, maybe 80% work, 20% personal. And that's fine if you can give that in that season. But I would say pick your hard and then be at peace with it. And I feel that that helps you to then understand what boundaries to set pertaining to that harmony you want to achieve and then how to police them. Like in my role, I have to admit, like there are things that if I told people I have to do, they'll be like, yikes. Like I have to be accessible when I'm on leave, with the exception of like a block leave period where for regulatory reasons, like I should not be contacted. If there's an escalation while I'm on leave, I have to be able to respond to it. You know,
yeah,
I don't work 9 to 5. I can't remember the last time I worked 9 to 5. But that's me choosing my hard because I know what I signed up to when I chose this job. Do you know what I mean? If I
yeah, I
don't
do.
want that, I can actually scale back and do something else where actually I can log in at 9 and log out at 5. And then that's my hard. But that then means that I can't then achieve certain things career-wise and prosperity-wise I would want to because I've had to accept another trade-off. So I would say choose your hard and be at peace with it.
So, Nika, still talking about personal growth. Um, if you want to constantly self-improve yourself, what core habits must an employee have?
So the first I would say is discipline. Um, Discipline will take you to places where your talents, your gifts, motivation absolutely can't. Discipline will have you prioritizing things when you don't have a desire to, but you can understand like the long-term aspiration, the vision, etc. And discipline enables you to be very choiceful as to what you involve yourself with and what you absolutely say no to, because the reality is that we are very time poor. And we have to choose wisely as to what we get involved with. So I would say discipline is something that has carried me very far in my career. And I'm so thankful that I am a very disciplined person. So I'll definitely say that one is having a growth mindset. And that growth mindset piece is key, right? Because I feel that sometimes when you are born into certain circumstances that don't afford you access to certain things, you can sometimes allow your circumstances, your story to define you and hold you back. But that growth mindset is you kind of saying, okay, cool, I see myself as here. I may be somewhere completely different today, but I can get there through creating some very healthy habits and being more disciplined and continuing to evolve and grow, staying curious, seeking feedback, staying abreast of emerging trends, and maybe like retraining, being open to pivoting. So I would say, yeah, those things I would highly recommend as some like core things to be mindful of as one who aspires to continue growing and developing and progressing, regardless of your field. But for me, if I were to choose one, it would be being disciplined and staying disciplined. And it's hard. Choose your hard.
Yeah, it really is hard. I mean, we all know these things, but do we do them? Is the question. Um, so Nika, you're a mentor, you're a leader. So I want to know, how do you support your mentees in their career growth?
So with my mentees, I like to empower them. So I can talk a lot. I know that. So I always start off like the mentee mentor like chemistry conversation by asking them what it is that I can do for them. I want to hear from them. And I always ask them as well, I was like, why would you like me to mentor? You can pick from all these other people. Like, why me? Like, why me? What can I do for you? And then I ask them to then go away because I never say yes the moment I'm approached to be a mentor. I say, okay, we've had a nice conversation. Like, okay, go away, think about it, and then come back and let me know if you really want it to be me, right? Because I want to empower them and have them opt out if they really don't want to, after that chemistry conversation, like continue on the journey. But then once we do decide to embark on the journey, I ask them to be individuals willing to be held to account. That's super important. To the extent that they are open to it, I will like pour into them, I guess, some of my experiences as well, so that they can learn from that. I don't volunteer that immediately. I like them to invite me into that because it's the mentor-mentee relationship is not about me. It's about them gaining, right? And the extent to which I can give back and pay it forward. So I want them to set the tone and I want the relationship to evolve on their terms. So based on the extent to which they invite me to, I am always willing to open up and share my story, share my lessons learned, right? And some of the really painful ones too, because it's not been a walk in the park. I've had to sit with some uncomfortable moments and deal with some pain along the way, but I have learned a lot from it. And for me, one of my biggest hopes from being a mentor is that my mentees don't have to vicariously go through the things that I went through. If anecdotally I can help them avoid certain pitfalls and certain pitfalls, then it's wonderful. So yeah.
That's great. I mean, I have a mentor and we have a great relationship. I mean, it's fantastic. So how did you become a mentor?
How did I become a mentor? So there came a point in my career where because I was seen as a leader in the organization, people would naturally reach out to me and kind of say, hey, and more like on an informal basis, hey, can I use your sounding board for this? Da, 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 da. And would you be open to like maybe doing this more long term and whatever kind of thing? So it evolved that way to some extent, in some context. There's an organization called Black Women in HR, and I signed up to like their mentorship program as a mentor. So I had one mentee through that. And at work, I'm often approached, by people wanting me to mentor them. And I'm quite time poor, so I'm quite picky, but I do carve the time out for those who demonstrate to me that they are very driven, that they are very intentional, and that they put a lot of thought into why they would like me to be their mentor over others. So yeah, but I've fallen into a mentorship role at times organically through just being approached to give advice, and then the requester wanting it to evolve into something more structured and more formal. And I myself have also thrown my hat in the ring to express interest in being a mentor based on the capacity that I knew I had to give back in that particular season or in support of that particular initiative.
So how do you, as a mentor, how do you encourage your mentees to develop, their skills in their career? Because it's a bit difficult to try and, encourage people, to make them better, especially if they don't want to. I know a few people that just don't want mentors. I mean, I've got friends in my organizations that just don't see the point of that.
Mm.
So if you can talk a little bit about the major role of mentorship.
Yeah, so I mean, I've benefited from having amazing mentors. First and foremost, that's what I'll start off by saying. And as those mentorship relationships evolved, I came to realize the importance of having one. And I have one. In fact, I have a few today, to be honest. When I think about mentorship, right, I think about the fact that career journeys can be quite lonely. They really can be lonely. And sometimes that mentor is probably one of the few safe spaces that you actually have.
Absolutely. I do agree to that.
And you might be in a team, but you can often feel lonely in a team, or you may not feel that you get that developmental, that coaching, that guidance support from your manager for one reason or another. But through having a mentor and then contracting with them upfront around what it is that you want, you are taking steps to ensuring that a critical need is met. So to your point about some not understanding the value of a mentor, part of me wonders whether that's because they've not experienced good mentorship. And it's really important before you embark on a mentee-mentor relationship that you contract, you broker up front what that's going to look like. Because I could mentor 5 different people and they all want different things from me. And I can't make the mistake of assuming that what Jackie wants, Taylor wants. So there has to be that chemistry conversation where there's an appreciation for the needs, the wants, the journey that one is on, and where you as the mentor can come in. But to your point about developing skills, right? It's spending time understanding like what the mentee's aspirations are, like what is the long-term goal, what is the pursuit, what is their North Star, where do they see themselves going? And then through like the conversations as they naturally evolve, understanding like what is it that motivates them? What can they see themselves doing? Encouraging them to ask themselves the open-ended questions like the whys, the whats, the wheres, the whos, the hows, and then sitting with those responses. And then seeing what they come back to you with, because sometimes they actually reach that aha moment themselves without you actually having to say much. But by you just holding space for them to sit without distractions or chaos or anything, with the responses they have formed to the questions that you've asked them, they sometimes reach that point. But I've always believed that going one step further, speaking more specifically about skills, you have to perfect your craft if you want to be seen as talent in an organization. You cannot rest on your laurels. What may have sufficed last year is no longer enough this year, and what sufficed this year will not be enough tomorrow. Like when you even think about the direction which organizations are headed, like there's a lot of talk about building a skills-based organization. Why? Because it's about ensuring that colleagues are prepared for the future and that they are marketable regardless of like the BAU job they're doing today. So it's really important that you can constantly demonstrate like that value add to the organization because it's business at the end of the day. In
Yeah.
the services that you offer, your company then pays you a salary. You have to continue to ensure that you are seen as a valuable asset
Yep.
organization's eyes. So it's on you. You owe it to yourself to continue maximizing your full potential, reskilling, upskilling yourself, and ensuring that you can contribute based on the strategic priorities of the organization. And unfortunately, if you don't keep pace, you may find yourself missing out on opportunities, maybe even falling into a scenario where you're underperforming. So you just can't rest on your laurels. And to the question about feedback earlier on, feedback will help you understand where you're trending relative to the trajectory that you believe you're on. And it can also help you understand where there might be a disparity between how you see yourself performance-wise and skills-wise and capability-wise, and how the organization sees you as well. And it then gives you an opportunity to course correct for that before it's too late.
Fantastic. Wow. So insightful. Still on the topic, navigating success within career growth and personal growth. It's been so insightful. Thank you very much, Nike. I can see some questions in I can see a question pop up if we're going to have a Q&A session. Are you happy to answer some questions?
Yeah, of course, yeah. On the condition that people put their cameras on.
Did you hear Nike? So, I mean, let's talk about navigating challenges. So, a lot of employees do have self-doubt. So how do you overcome this if you're going after your career growth?
So we've probably heard people speaking a lot about imposter syndrome, right? And then people might say things like, oh yeah, here's how you overcome imposter syndrome. I've got a controversial view. I don't think you ever overcome it. I think you navigate it. You look it in the eye and you say, okay, you might personify and give it a name, but you navigate it. I don't think it ever goes away, because for me, imposter syndrome, it keeps us humble, to be honest. Like, nobody wants somebody who thinks that they are
I love that, what you've
it.
just said. Oh my God, I'm sorry I cut you short, but
that's okay. No, go for it.
I love what you've just said. It keeps you humble.
Because I think that people, like, on this pursuit, being so fearless on the pursuit of what sets you on fire, yada, 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 they think they're going to wake up one day and be like Xena warrior princess, all these issues no longer going to be there. No, like, the most senior MD deals with imposter syndrome. We just have to deploy techniques and mechanisms to ensure that we don't let the imposter syndrome define us and hold us back. But it reminds us that we're human and that we feel, and that we're very present, and that we aren't perfect. So to answer that question about how you overcome self-doubt, I think first and foremost is understanding that everybody does experience it to some degree. The second is that, yeah, the self-doubt might be there, but you have to kind of decide what you're going to do with it. And I kind of think of the word fear. So fear, F-E-A-R, right? So think of it as an acronym. So you can either forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. Like, you have a choice. And I think it's recognizing that in that moment where you experience those feelings and your physiology is like popping off all over the place, you're just like, oh, I've got the sweats, or, my throat's gone dry, or I'm questioning whether I should be there. It's like, right, okay, what am I going to do with that? Because, and by the way, there's this amazing book. Oh, let me just get it for you guys. One moment.
Please.
I'm going to take my camera off. I'm going to unblur my background so that you can see it. Okay, so this book here is called Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. Read it. It's amazing. I bought the hard copy. I listened to it on by audio though, because I was like, yeah, I wanted to like be around the house as I was listening. But really good book, because she actually talks about how some emotions result in, are the byproducts of very similar physiological responses. So she talks about excitement and anxiety, and how you often experience very similar physiological reactions, but the mind is what convinces you that that feeling is because you're excited versus because you're anxious, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So I think that to some extent, it's about when you're staring that moment in the face where you're experiencing those doubts or whatever, it's reminding yourself that you actually still have a choice. That juncture you've reached is not what determines what happens. You determine what happens by what you do with what you experience. But the doubt, you're always going to come across the doubt, and you're always going to come across the doubt because as you grow, you will find that you will then move from being the big fish in a small pond to the small fish in the big pond. And you have to constantly deconstruct certain notions and then construct new ones. And as you're doing that, there's a lot of discomfort. It's uncharted territory, and that doubt will creep in. But again, having a solid board of advisors, again, knowing that you always have a choice as to how you respond, And then three, to your point about personal development versus career development, like being very cognizant of the journey that you've been on and the fact that you owe it to yourself to go after everything that you possibly can to be the best version of yourself.
Wow, thank you, Nike. What advice would you give to an employee who's experiencing setback in their career?
Um, it kind of depends on the setback. So if you, do you know what I mean? Because I feel like setbacks is quite, it's quite subjective and it kind of depends on the type of setback. But going back to the faith point, right? Sometimes it's a no, but it's a no for now and it's not a no forever. And I think it's just how you reframe it. Because sometimes we become very downtrodden the moment something doesn't quite play out as we hoped it would. But
Yeah.
use every moment of disappointment to pause and reflect and to learn. Um, but then also spend a bit of time dissecting why you actually think it's a setback. Sometimes it is a setback, but sometimes it's just not. It's actually a pivot disguised, and that goes back to the whole mindset piece. Um, there was a point in my career where I was put up for a promotion because of like some politics or whatever, it didn't go through. And I was like, oh, and I cried in the office. I remember I was in New York, and I cried in the office, and I was like, this is such an injustice. Then I went away and I reflected, and I was like, okay, so yeah, that is a setback technically, but what that now means is that I've got another year where when I then am eventually promoted, I'm a slam dunk. There's no way anyone's questioning anything about me. If anything, people are now going to be like, Nikki, this is like long overdue. This should have happened ages ago, right? Rather than "Ugh, she got it, how kind of thing. So you sometimes need to take those moments where they are painful and they are disappointing, and then kind of say to yourself, okay, cool, like what lessons can I learn from this? And how do I use this to propel myself to greatness?
Yep.
And again, it's that choice piece, right? You always have a choice about how you frame your mind. It is, and again, it's the growth mindset piece. Because somebody with a growth mindset doesn't let the setbacks define them. They take them and say, okay, cool, I'm now going to spin it on its head and make something out of this. Like when life gives you lemons, make some sweet lemonade.
Beautiful.
You got to make some
Fantastic.
lemonade.
You've got to make lemonade. You've got to. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nike.
You're
Let's
welcome.
talk about emerging trends. So what skills do you think um, are critical for, you know, the growth in today's rapidly changing workplace?
So sometimes I think of this as a skill, sometimes more of a characteristic trait, but I think empathy, especially if you aspire to be a leader. I've worked in a number of organizations where we've had to really transform the way that we define good leadership, because too often leaders were leaders because they were great at their job, but they weren't really great at articulating a vision or empowering their teams and helping their teams unlock their greatness and become better versions of themselves. They didn't know how to sit with their teams during very challenging moments in their careers and their lives and like coach them and be by their side. So I think empathy is one that is critical. And I think that the pandemic highlighted or amplified, should I say, the importance of having greater empathy. I feel like in a world where, there's people who are queuing to judge, I think we need more empathy and more kindness and just less judgment, to be honest. Yeah, empathy is definitely one of them. I would say courageous leadership as well, right? And courage looks like different things to different people, but being willing to take a stand for something. I'm not saying like be a rebel, be a bull in a china shop and like just open your mouth and challenge everything, but be willing to take a stand for some things. Be mindful about what those things are, but be willing to take a stand. Um, Authenticity. Don't aspire to be the next somebody else. Aspire to be the best version of you and think about how you show up as your authentic self. And I remember I was having a conversation with my exec coach, and we were talking about showing up as your authentic self. And she gave me a great analogy. And she was like, look, envisage yourself as a color. So pick a color, your purple. And that color represents a gradient. Now, in some scenarios, you might show a very deep shade of purple, but in other scenarios, you might only choose to show less of yourself. Maybe that's lilac. The fact that you gave one person a very deep shade of purple and you gave the other person lilac doesn't mean that you're inauthentic.
Mm-hmm.
It meant that you read the room and you knew how much of you to give or what side of you to give based on what that room, that scenario required from you or warranted in that moment. So yeah, authenticity, being an authentic individual. But then moving more onto like, I guess, hard skills, technical skills, you want to kind of call it
Yep.
that. I
Yep.
think AI is definitely one to invest in. I'm actually going to enroll in like a program, the Kellogg School of Management, actually, just like AI basics, because I know people, they speak about AI with such the fear, right? They think AI is going to like replace their jobs. I think no, it's actually going to change the way that we do our jobs. And it's really important that we don't allow AI to become weaponized and we actually see it
Yes.
as an enabling tool. So yeah, I definitely think AI is definitely going to like transform the way that we operate and lead to greater efficiencies and just make our roles more fun and more dynamic. Sustainability is another one. There's greater call for organizations to be more responsible, more ethical in their practices. So
Yeah.
having a grasp of how you can contribute to those agendas, regardless of where you sit, if you're in a function, if you're in a front office, if you're a lawyer, whatever, I think is invaluable and will definitely add another feather to your cap as well. And a final thing I would say as well is like being data informed, data led. Some people like they run the moment they hear data or they hear about the need to review a report or something. But I feel that data is a very underrated or yeah, undervalued tool. It's something that can be very empowering if you know how to interpret it
Yeah.
and how to incorporate into discussions. And it also then enables you to remain curious, right? Because by observing data, you then become inclined to like anticipate emerging trends. You then kind of like go on like a bit of like this how can I voyage of discovery around like what data can potentially, enlighten you on around other areas as well. So yeah, I would say sustainability, AI, being data-led, data informed, empathy, and authenticity.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, still talking about emerging trends, I was having a conversation with someone today, and he actually said to me that remote working has actually made him a bit lazy. What do you think? What do you think about hybrid working, remote working, um, and how do you think it has impacted on people's um, career growth, professional growth, personal growth, if you like?
So I'm a massive advocate for hybrid working. And interestingly, hybrid working was first rolled out to me as an employee when I was at Standard Chartered first time around. So I recently relocated back to the UK from the States. And then I think it was like March, pandemic hit. So I was initially like, they kind of split employees into two different colors. You were either blue or green, which are the Standard Chartered colors for anybody who doesn't know the brand. So I was team green. So we had to work from home the first week. They were trying to basically avoid like cross-contamination and mixing. So they said, okay, green team, you work from home, and the blues, you'll go the following week, and greens will come in the office. Then it was like complete remote working. I love remote working because I find it very empowering, but it only works if it's not abused and if it's used in the right way. So I know that for many employees, they look back and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that we want you to come into the office 5 days a week. Like, how on earth did we do it and then still like do life? I can't like believe that I used to have to schedule all of my doctor's appointments at like 6 o'clock in the evening. How did I ever make it work? Now, I feel that hybrid working is a beautiful gift because it actually enables employees to strike a work-life harmony and then ensure that they can show up as their best selves
Yeah.
in any organization because they're not worried or burdened with all the things they then need to fit in that relates to their personal life
Mhm.
on the weekend. They have greater flexibility to schedule their days in a way that works for them. Like for me, for example, I often come online really early because I have to work a lot with Asia markets. So I might work from home, do some calls from like 6 until 8:39. Then I'll travel into the office around 9 with my coffee, take my time, sit down. I've been arranged so that like the second half of the day is mainly like in-person meetings. And then maybe I might do a few calls in the evening. But I get to manage my flow of work.
Yeah.
And the hybrid working enables me to do that. The one thing I would say though is that in a hybrid working environment, you need to be very intentional about remaining visible.
Mm-hmm.
I made a point before, don't rest on your laurels, don't get too complacent, too complacent. See it as hybrid working and not I'm working from home. Because I think if you tell yourself it's hybrid working, I think it's more empowering, you're more focused. I thought that for some people, when they tell themselves, yeah, I'm working from home, like they let the guard down altogether. Like professionalism for some, not all, and not for many, but for some, it does go out of the window. And it's important you understand that in a hybrid environment where sometimes out of sight can be out of mind, you need to find ways to ensure that your team, those in your ecosystem, are aware of who you are. They are constantly connected to you, that you show up as being part of a team, however you attend a meeting, be it in person or from home. And that people are constantly aware of what you're doing as well. And they don't have to question whether or not you are adding value and if you are committed as an employee to the overall workforce. But I think it's a brilliant thing, so long as it's not abused, and so long as individuals who opt to work from home in particular find ways to ensure they are very much seen as present by those who aren't in the same like working environment as them.
Brilliant. I mean, I work from home 2 days a week, on Thursdays and Fridays. Mondays to Wednesdays, I go into the office, and I like both. I like working from home. It allows me to do things. I've got kids, I've got school runs and all of these things. It allows me to schedule hospital appointments, like you just said, and I also like working in the office as well. So yeah.
There's merit to
Um,
both, for sure. Yeah, there's definitely merit to both. So,
so we're nearly at the end. I've got just one last question for you
right.
now. So if you were to advise an employee that is just starting out in their career, what advice would you give? What best advice would you give?
Oh, I would say be kind to yourself and extend yourself grace first and foremost. That. The second, mentioned before, you either win or you learn. You don't lose. So learn from your mistakes and embrace those moments to fail fast. The most successful person has failed somewhere. Be disciplined. Like that, I can't emphasize that more than I have. Like I even think about like Wura, my cousin, she knows like we're both like gym rats, right? And I don't go to the gym because I'm motivated 3/4 of the time. I go to the gym because I'm disciplined and I know that if I don't, I will pay. Do you know what I mean? That's it. It's that black and white. The discipline honestly will carry you to places that motivation and talent and creativity just can't. Be disciplined. And don't be rigid as to the pathway your career would take. If I was to actually present to my, how old am I now? I'm 38. So present to like my 22-year-old self, I guess, 23-year-old self, the journey that I would embark on in my HR career, I'm not sure how I would have taken that, to be honest. I don't know if I would have been up for it, right? But I was, is the point. I embarked on a HR career by doing a very humble job. People often say to me now, Nikke, you're so lucky. I'm like, no, 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 don't you dare. Because listen, I took some L's. Like when you're a PA, you don't always get the best treatment. Now, I wasn't mistreated, but you don't get certain respect and kudos, right? It's like, oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
And you're just like, okay, cool, I'll just do it, right? Because I know my place. I am the personal assistant. But I've remained open the entire time. I've made moves that people didn't understand. I've made moves that people questioned. I've made moves where I've kind of even like had to pull myself to the room and kind of said, Nikke, that was a bit brave. Are you sure about this kind of thing? But remaining open, because then you're pleasantly surprised. I feel that sometimes our desire to be too in control, we should be in control to a certain extent, but our desire to be too in control limits us and we block ourselves from our blessings. Just be open, be really, really open, and you may be pleasantly surprised.
It's been such a wonderful time that I've had with you this evening. You wouldn't believe it. It's been such a lovely, lovely time. Thank you so much
My absolute
for,
pleasure.
for an insightful evening. Thank you.
You are so welcome. No, honestly, my absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.